I still remember the look on that little girl's face when she whispered she wasn't allowed to ask strangers for food, because in that moment I realized some people carry their pride even after life has taken everything from them. Rain hammered the empty streets of Cedar Creek just after 9 p.m., turning the small Wyoming town into a blur of yellow streetlights and silver puddles as Emily Carter wiped down the counter inside Rosie's diner. The same diner her late mother had worked in for almost 30 years before cancer took her away. The smell of coffee and fried onions still hung in the air while the old country song, playing from the jukebox, echoed through the nearly empty restaurant. And Emily was counting tips when she noticed a little girl standing outside the fogged-up window in a soaked pink hoodie that looked 2 sizes too small. The child couldn't have been older than 7. Her curly dark hair was dripping wet, and both hands were wrapped around her stomach like she was trying to ignore the hunger pains. Beside her stood a tall black man wearing a worn brown jacket, muddy boots, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. His beard was untrimmed, his clothes looked exhausted from weeks on the road, and despite the freezing rain rolling down his face, he kept trying to shield the little girl from the wind with his own body. Emily watched him kneel beside the child and quietly say something that made the girl nod, even though her eyes stayed locked on the diner menu hanging in the window. Then the little girl softly said, "Dad, I'm really hungry." The man forced a tired smile and brushed rainwater from her forehead. "I know, sweetheart. Just give me a minute." Emily swallowed hard because she recognized that tone instantly. It was the voice of someone trying to stay strong after running out of options. A pickup truck roared past outside, splashing cold water across the sidewalk, and the little girl jumped back. The man quickly wrapped an arm around her shoulders and looked toward the diner entrance. But instead of walking in, he lowered his eyes and turned away like he already expected rejection before anyone could say a word. That was the moment Emily grabbed 2 bowls of chicken soup from the kitchen counter before her manager could stop her. She pushed open the diner door, and the cold Wyoming wind immediately hit her face. "Hey," she called out gently. The man stopped walking but didn't turn around at first. "The kitchen made extra soup tonight," she lied with a small smile. "Would be a shame if it went to waste." The little girl stared at the steam rising from the bowls with wide eyes, but the man hesitated. Up close, Emily noticed something strange about him. Even soaked in rain and dressed like a homeless traveler, he carried himself differently. His posture was calm, controlled, like someone who used to walk into important rooms without fear. His voice was deep and careful when he finally spoke. "We can't afford it." Emily handed the little girl one of the bowls anyway. "Good thing it's free." The child looked up at her father for permission before accepting it, and that alone broke Emily's heart because most hungry kids would have grabbed the food instantly. But this little girl still had manners, still had discipline, still trusted her father completely. The man slowly accepted the second bowl. "Thank you," he said quietly. For a second their eyes met beneath the diner lights, and Emily felt something she couldn't explain. Sadness, exhaustion, pride, and underneath all of it, intelligence. Not ordinary intelligence, either. The kind that noticed everything. The kind that had once belonged somewhere powerful. Then the little girl smiled for the first time all night and whispered, "Dad, this is the best soup ever." And as thunder rolled over Cedar Creek, Emily had no idea that the soaking wet stranger standing in front of her was one of the richest men in America. Emily told herself she was only helping them for one night, but deep down, she knew the moment that little girl smiled at her in the rain, something inside her had already changed. Rosie's diner officially closed at 10 o'clock, but nearly 40 minutes later Marcus and his daughter were still sitting quietly in the back booth while the storm rattled the windows hard enough to make the old neon sign buzz above the entrance. The little girl had finished every last spoonful of soup and was now half asleep against her father's arm while he slowly sipped black coffee like a man, trying to stay awake through more than just exhaustion. Emily pretended to organize sugar packets while secretly watching them from behind the counter. Something about Marcus did not make sense. Most drifters passing through Cedar Creek either talked too much or avoided eye contact completely. But Marcus spoke carefully, almost like every word was measured before he allowed it out. Even the way he thanked her felt different. Calm, educated, controlled. When he noticed Emily staring, he offered a polite smile. Sorry we stayed so late. Emily shook her head. You are fine. Storm is getting worse anyway. Another crack of thunder rolled outside, and the lights flickered for half a second. The little girl stirred awake immediately, gripping her father's sleeve. Marcus leaned down. It is okay, Sophie. Just thunder. Emily smiled softly. Her name is Sophie? The little girl nodded shyly. Sophia Hale, she whispered before covering her mouth like she had accidentally said something important. Marcus gently rubbed her shoulder. We just call her Sophie. Emily noticed the last name instantly, but did not think much of it. Hale was common enough. Still, the moment stayed in her mind for reasons she could not explain. Suddenly, the front door swung open hard enough for cold air to rush across the diner floor. 3 local men walked in wearing construction jackets and muddy boots from the oil fields outside town. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Rick Dalton, immediately spotted Marcus in the booth and lowered his voice toward the others with a smirk. Great. Another drifter. Emily felt tension rise instantly. Rick had lived in Cedar Creek his whole life and treated outsiders like problems before they even spoke. Kitchen is closed. Rick, Emily said quickly. But Rick ignored her. His eyes stayed locked on Marcus. You planning on sleeping here tonight too? Marcus remained calm. We will be gone soon. Rick laughed under his breath. That is what they all say. Sophie lowered her eyes toward the table, and Emily saw the embarrassment on her face immediately. It made her stomach tighten. Marcus quietly set down his coffee cup. My daughter is tired. I would appreciate peace. The simple sentence somehow made the room even quieter. Rick looked surprised for a second, probably because Marcus sounded nothing like the homeless men that sometimes wandered through town. There was authority in his voice, the kind that made people listen without raising volume. One of Rick's friends leaned closer and whispered, Man talks like he owns the place. Rick chuckled. Maybe he used to. Emily stepped around the counter before things could get worse. Enough, Rick. He raised both hands with a fake grin. Relax, Emily. Just protecting the town. Then his eyes shifted back toward Marcus. People around here work for what they have. Marcus looked directly at him without anger. That is true everywhere. For some reason, that answer irritated Rick even more. But before he could respond, Sophie suddenly coughed hard into her sleeve. Emily noticed the child shivering again despite the warm diner lights. Marcus immediately removed his own jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders without hesitation, leaving himself in only a thin gray shirt against the cold draft near the windows. Emily saw the protective instinct in him instantly. Nothing about it looked fake. Rick finally shook his head and walked back toward the door. Just make sure they're gone by morning. The men left laughing into the rain while silence settled across the diner again. Sophie stared down at the table, clearly trying not to cry. Emily quietly walked over and placed a slice of warm apple pie in front of her. My mom used to say, pie fixes almost everything. Sophie looked up carefully. Really? Emily smiled, especially on bad nights. Marcus watched Emily for several seconds with an unreadable expression before speaking softly. Most people stop seeing others after they fall on hard times. Emily glanced toward the storm outside. Maybe that says more about them than it does about you. And for the first time all night, Marcus looked genuinely caught off guard by someone's kindness. Emily had spent most of her life around people who talked loudly about success, but there was something far more powerful about a man who had clearly lost everything and still treated others with dignity. Midnight crept over Cedar Creek as the rain finally softened into a cold drizzle tapping against the diner windows. Rosie's diner was supposed to be empty by now, but Emily could not bring herself to send Marcus and Sophie back outside into 38-degree weather with nowhere to go. Sophie had fallen asleep curled up against the booth with Marcus's oversized jacket wrapped around her small shoulders, one tiny hand still holding the spoon from her apple pie. Marcus sat awake beside her, watching the storm through the window with the distant expression of someone carrying thoughts too heavy to explain. Emily slowly approached the booth while drying her hands with a towel. There's a storage room in the back, she said quietly. Marcus looked up immediately. Emily, we cannot impose like that. It is not much, she admitted. Just an old couch and some extra supplies. But it is warm. Marcus glanced down at his sleeping daughter. For the first time all evening, Emily saw hesitation crack through his calm exterior. Not pride, guilt, the kind fathers carried when they felt they were failing their children. I will pay you back somehow, he finally said. Emily gave a small shrug. You already said thank you. That is enough. Marcus studied her face carefully, almost like he was trying to understand why she was helping strangers at all. Most people are not kind without wanting something in return. Emily leaned lightly against the booth. Maybe that is why the world feels so cold lately. For several seconds, Marcus said nothing. Then he looked towards Sophie again and nodded once. One night, he said softly. Emily led them through the kitchen into the narrow storage room behind the diner, where old boxes of canned goods lined the walls beside a faded green couch. She grabbed extra blankets from the employee closet while Marcus gently laid Sophie down. The little girl barely stirred before immediately curling closer into the blanket from exhaustion. Emily noticed Marcus kneeling beside her for a moment longer than necessary, brushing damp curls away from his daughter's forehead with a tenderness that instantly reminded her of her own father before he passed away. She trusts you completely, Emily whispered before she could stop herself. Marcus stood slowly. She's all I have left. The sentence hung heavy in the quiet room. Emily wanted to ask what happened to Sophie's mother, but something in Marcus's eyes warned her not to push too far. Instead, she handed him another blanket. As he reached for it, the sleeve of his worn jacket shifted slightly, revealing part of an expensive silver watch beneath the fabric. Emily froze for half a second. Even with only a quick glance, she recognized quality when she saw it. The watch looked like something worth more than her entire yearly salary at the diner. Marcus immediately pulled his sleeve back down once he noticed her looking. Family gift, he explained calmly. Emily nodded, pretending not to think about it anymore. But questions quietly began forming in the back of her mind. Before leaving, she pointed toward the hallway. There's a coffee machine in the kitchen if you need anything during the night. Marcus gave her a small smile. You trust strangers too easily. Emily crossed her arms lightly. Funny thing is, I do not actually think you are a stranger. Marcus looked genuinely surprised by that answer. What makes you say that? Emily hesitated before responding. Because people show who they are when life gets hard. And you have spent this entire night making sure Sophie feels safe before thinking about yourself. Marcus looked down for a moment as if her words hit somewhere deeper than she realized. Then he quietly said, You notice more than most people, Emily Carter. Hearing him say her full name caught her off guard because she had never introduced herself completely. Marcus noticed her expression immediately and gave the faintest smile. Your name tag, he explained. Emily laughed softly at herself, but even as she walked away toward the kitchen, something about the interaction stayed with her. And inside the storage room, after the lights dimmed and the diner fell silent, Marcus reached into his backpack once Sophie was asleep and carefully pulled out a thin black cell phone that looked far too modern and expensive for a homeless traveler. The screen lit up with over 30 missed calls and one message marked urgent from someone named Daniel Reeves. Marcus stared at the screen for several long seconds before locking the phone again and slipping it back into the bag without replying. Emily barely slept that night because something about Marcus Hale kept replaying in her mind like a puzzle piece that refused to fit anywhere. At 5:30 the next morning, the sky above Cedar Creek was still dark blue when she unlocked the front door of Rosie's Diner and stepped inside, carrying fresh bread from the bakery across Main Street. The storm had passed, leaving thin fog drifting through town while water dripped from rooftops into the empty streets. She expected silence when she entered the diner, but instead she froze near the counter after hearing the sharp metallic sound of tools clinking somewhere in the kitchen. Emily quickly walked toward the back hallway and stopped in disbelief. Marcus was kneeling beside the diner's broken industrial dishwasher with the entire side panel removed and several tools spread neatly across the floor beside him. Sophie sat nearby on a milk crate coloring in an old kid's menu with crayons Emily had given her before sunrise. "What are you doing?" Emily asked in shock. Marcus glanced up calmly. "Your water pressure valve was clogged. The heating coil was about to fail too." Emily blinked twice. "What do you even know how to fix that?" Marcus tightened something with a wrench before answering. "My father believed every man should know how to repair things with his hands before he learned how to manage money." The answer sounded strangely specific. Emily stepped closer and noticed the machine that had been broken for almost 3 weeks was suddenly humming smoothly again. "Wait," she said slowly. "Joe from maintenance said this thing would cost at least $2,000 to replace." Marcus stood and wiped his hands with a towel. Joe was wrong. Emily stared at the machine in disbelief while hot water finally rushed through the pipes without sputtering for the first time in weeks. "You fixed it in less than 30 minutes. Marcus simply shrugged. It was not complicated. Sophie looked up proudly from her coloring page. "My dad can fix almost anything." Marcus gave her a gentle look. "Not almost anything." Sophie smiled. "Everything." Emily laughed softly before noticing something strange again. Marcus had worked on the dishwasher with the precision of a trained engineer, but his hands did not look rough like a mechanic's. They looked clean, careful, controlled, like someone more used to signing contracts than repairing kitchen equipment. Before she could ask another question, the front entrance bell rang loudly. Emily turned and immediately felt her mood tighten. Brad Coleman walked inside, wearing an expensive wool coat and polished cowboy boots, carrying the same confident grin he always wore whenever he wanted attention. Brad owned several commercial properties around Cedar Creek and never missed a chance to remind people he planned on owning half the town someday. He also happened to be Emily's ex-boyfriend. "Morning, Em," Brad called while removing his sunglasses. Then he spotted Marcus standing near the dishwasher. His smile faded slightly. "Well, guess the rumors were true." Emily crossed her arms. "What rumors?" Brad smirked. "That you let some drifter sleep in the diner overnight." Marcus remained silent, but Emily instantly noticed Sophie lowering her eyes again the same way she had the night before. Brad slowly looked Marcus up and down. "You know people are talking, right? Small towns notice things." Emily stepped forward. "He fixed the dishwasher." Brad laughed once. "Great. Maybe he can fix the roof too." Marcus calmly met his eyes. "If it needs repair." Something about Marcus's calm response clearly irritated Brad more than anger would have. Brad turned back toward Emily. "You cannot save everybody, Em." Emily's voice sharpened slightly. "Funny. My mother used to say the same thing about you." Brad's smile tightened. For a second the room went quiet except for the sound of dishes rattling in the kitchen. Then Brad reached into his coat pocket and placed a folder on the counter. "Actually, I came to help you." Emily looked suspicious immediately. "Help me with what?" Brad tapped the folder lightly. "Your bank situation." Emily's stomach dropped. She had missed 2 loan payments on the diner after a brutal winter season, but almost nobody knew about it. Brad lowered his voice. "You are running out of time, Emily." Marcus subtly glanced toward the folder without saying a word. Brad continued smoothly. "I can buy this place before the bank takes it from you." Emily felt heat rise in her face instantly. "Rosie's Diner is not for sale." Brad leaned closer. "Everything is for sale eventually." Then his eyes shifted toward Marcus again, especially when people start making desperate choices. Sophie quietly moved closer to her father while tension filled the diner. But instead of reacting emotionally, Marcus simply looked at Brad with a calm expression that somehow felt more intimidating than anger. A person should be careful not to mistake temporary hardship for weakness, Marcus said quietly. Brad chuckled under his breath. "And what exactly would you know about business?" Marcus gave the faintest smile. "More than you think." The moment Brad placed the folder on the counter, the entire atmosphere inside Rosie's Diner shifted in a way Emily could feel in her chest before anyone even spoke. Marcus remained still near the dishwasher he had just repaired, but his attention was now fully focused on Brad in a way that felt controlled rather than reactive, like a man observing a situation he had already analyzed long before it unfolded. Sophie stood quietly beside the booth, holding onto her coloring page with both hands as if it was something that could keep her safe from the tension in the room. Emily stared at the folder and forced herself to speak. What is that supposed to mean? Brad leaned casually against the counter, clearly enjoying the attention. It means I'm offering you a solution before the bank takes everything from you. Emily shook her head immediately. I do not need your solution. Brad sighed, as if she was being unreasonable. You're emotional about this place because of your mother. I understand that. But emotions do not pay bills. Marcus finally stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Sophie and the counter without making it obvious. You're correct, Marcus said calmly. Emotions do not pay bills. Brad smiled, thinking he had won the argument. Marcus continued, but neither does arrogance. The smile on Brad's face tightened. Emily glanced at Marcus, surprised by how calm he remained. There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. Brad tapped the folder again. Inside here is a fair offer. Above market value. You sign today, you walk away without debt. Emily crossed her arms. And where would I go? Brad shrugged. That is not my concern. Sophie quietly tugged on Marcus's sleeve. Dad, I do not like him. Marcus gently placed a hand on her shoulder. It is okay, Sophie. We are just listening. Brad looked slightly annoyed now. Look, Emily, this diner is outdated. It is barely surviving. You know it, I know it. I am giving you a way out before it collapses. Emily felt her throat tighten because part of what he said was true, even if she hated admitting it. The diner was struggling. Winter had been harsh. Supplies had increased in price. Customers had decreased. But before she could respond, Marcus slowly walked toward the counter and picked up the folder without opening it. Brad watched him carefully. Careful. That is private information. Marcus nodded slightly. I understand. Then Marcus placed the folder back down gently. You are offering her money because you believe she has no other options. Brad smirked. That is how business works. Marcus tilted his head slightly. No, that is how pressure works. Business requires value creation. Brad laughed under his breath. And I suppose you are an expert now. Marcus did not respond immediately. Instead, he glanced around the diner, observing the worn booths, the aging equipment, the handwritten menu board, and the tired but clean environment Emily maintained with pride. This place is not failing because of lack of value, Marcus said finally. It is failing because it has been neglected by systems that do not see its potential. Emily frowned slightly. What do you mean? Marcus looked at her directly. Your food costs are too high because your supplier contracts are outdated. Your electricity bill is inflated because your equipment efficiency is below standard. And your customer flow decreases because your location visibility is not being optimized. Brad blinked once, clearly caught off guard. And how would you know that? Marcus calmly replied. Because I used to evaluate businesses like this for a living. The room went completely silent for a moment. Emily stared at him, processing his words carefully. Sophie smiled proudly again. My dad knows everything about fixing things. Brad scoffed lightly. Sure he does. Marcus ignored the sarcasm and turned back to Emily. If you allow me, I can improve this place without selling it. Emily frowned. Why would you do that? Marcus looked towards Sophie for a brief second before answering. Because kindness is not a transaction. Brad let out a short laugh. That is the most unrealistic thing I have heard all day. Marcus finally turned toward him fully. Then perhaps that is why you keep losing things that matter. The words were quiet but landed heavily. Brad's expression changed slightly, not into anger, but into something more uncomfortable. Emily stepped between them slightly. Enough. This is not a competition. Marcus nodded. I agree. Brad closed the folder with more force than necessary. You are making a mistake, Emily. When that bang comes knocking, do not say I did not warn you. Then he turned and walked toward the door, pausing only once to look back at Marcus. People like you always leave eventually. Marcus met his gaze without hesitation. Not always for the reasons you assume. The door closed behind Brad, leaving only the quiet hum of the repaired dishwasher and the soft sound of Sophie humming to herself. Emily exhaled slowly, realizing her hands had been clenched the entire time. She looked at Marcus. Who exactly are you? Marcus hesitated just long enough for the question to feel heavier than intended. Then he simply said, someone who understands what it means to lose something worth saving. After Brad left, the silence inside Rosie's diner felt heavier than the storm that had passed the night before, as if his words had left a pressure in the air that nobody could immediately shake off. Emily stood behind the counter staring at the closed door, her thoughts tangled between frustration, fear, and a strange uncertainty she refused to admit out loud. Marcus remained near the repaired dishwasher, calmly wiping his hands as if nothing significant had just happened, while Sophie quietly returned to her coloring page, though her eyes kept drifting toward her father every few seconds as if she needed constant reassurance that everything was still safe. Emily finally broke the silence. "What you said to him about fixing things for a living, what did you mean?" Marcus paused for a moment before answering, carefully choosing his words. "I meant that I have spent a long time studying how systems fail when people stop paying attention." Emily leaned against the counter. "That does not sound like something a normal traveler would say." Marcus gave a faint, almost tired smile. "I'm not a normal traveler." Before Emily could respond, the front door suddenly chimed again, but this time it was not Brad. A middle-aged woman in a gray coat walked in holding a thick envelope and looking slightly out of breath. Emily recognized her immediately as Linda Harper from the county bank. Emily's stomach tightened. "Linda, is everything okay?" Linda hesitated before speaking. "Emily, I tried calling you earlier, but I needed to come in person." Emily stepped out from behind the counter. "What is going on?" Linda looked uncomfortable as she handed over the envelope. "Your loan review was accelerated this morning." Emily felt her heart drop instantly. "Accelerated?" Linda nodded. "The bank is reviewing underperforming small business accounts. Yours is on the list." The word list hit Emily harder than she expected. Marcus slowly walked closer but stayed silent. Sophie noticed the shift in energy and quietly moved closer to her father. Linda continued, "If you cannot bring your account current within 30 days, foreclosure proceedings will begin." Emily felt her breath tighten. 30 days? That is impossible. Linda softened her voice slightly. "I am. Sorry, Emily. I really am." Then she left as quickly as she arrived, leaving only the envelope on the counter like a warning that could not be ignored. Emily stared at it without opening it, her hands trembling slightly. Marcus finally spoke. "May I?" Emily hesitated before sliding the envelope toward him. Marcus opened it slowly, scanning the documents with a focus that was almost unsettling in its precision. After a few seconds, he looked up. "This is not random." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" Marcus turned one of the pages slightly. "The valuation drop on your property does not match regional trends. Your loan risk classification was adjusted downward too quickly." Emily shook her head. "I did not understand any of that." Marcus closed the folder gently. "Someone influenced this decision." The words made Emily freeze. "Are you saying someone is targeting my diner?" Marcus did not answer immediately, but his silence felt like confirmation. Sophie looked up nervously. "Dad." Marcus knelt beside her. "It is okay, Sophie. We were just thinking." Emily paced slowly behind the counter. "Why would anyone do that?" Marcus glanced toward the direction Brad had left earlier. "Because pressure creates opportunity for those who are waiting to take control." Emily stopped walking. "You think this is about Brad?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I think he sees your situation as an acquisition opportunity." Emily felt anger rise for the first time that day. "So he's trying to force me out?" Marcus nodded slightly. "Indirectly, yes." Emily looked at the counter, overwhelmed. "I cannot fight the bank. I cannot fight someone like him." Marcus stood slowly, his expression calm, but more serious than before. "You are not meant to fight alone." Emily looked at him. "Then what am I supposed to do?" Marcus paused for a long moment before responding. "You are supposed to decide whether this place is worth protecting." Sophie suddenly spoke softly. "It is. It smells like home." The simple words hit Emily harder than anything else that day. Marcus gently placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Sometimes the smallest voices understand the most important truths. Emily looked around the diner at the worn booths, the faded menu board, the repaired dishwasher humming softly in the background, and for the first time she saw it not as something failing, but as something being quietly held together by years of effort and memory. Marcus spoke again, almost under his breath. If you want to keep this place, I can help you stabilize it. Not with money, with structure. Emily turned back to him. Why would you go this far for strangers? Marcus met her eyes steadily. Because once upon a time, someone did the same for me. And for the first time since he arrived in Cedar Creek, Emily realized that Marcus Hale was not just hiding something. He was carrying something far heavier than anyone in the diner could yet understand. By the next morning, Cedar Creek felt different in a way Emily could not fully explain, as if the quiet town had started paying attention to things it usually ignored. The early sunlight spilled through the front windows of Rosie's diner, reflecting off the freshly cleaned counter where the bank envelope still sat untouched like a silent warning. Emily had barely slept, her mind circling around Marcus's words about influence, pressure, and decisions that did not look as random as they seemed. Sophie was sitting in one of the booths drawing a picture of what she called our diner family, while Marcus stood near the entrance watching the street with a calm focus that felt less like resting and more like observing. At exactly 7:45 in the morning, several pickup trucks passed by slowly outside, and Emily noticed people inside glancing toward the diner longer than usual. Whispers had already started spreading through town. By 8:30, the first customers arrived not for breakfast, but for questions. A local farmer named George entered and immediately asked Emily, "Is it true the bank is taking over?" Emily hesitated. "Who told you that?" George glanced outside. "People are talking." Marcus quietly stepped forward from the corner. Rumors spread quickly in small towns. George looked at Marcus carefully. "And who are you supposed to be in all of this?" Marcus answered simply, "Someone passing through." George nodded slowly, but did not look convinced. More customers came in over the next hour, and each conversation carried the same undertone. Concern mixed with curiosity, curiosity mixed with judgment. Emily felt the diner becoming something she could not control anymore. Around 9:15, Brad Coleman entered again, this time not alone. Two men in tailored jackets followed him, carrying briefcases and standing with the kind of posture that did not belong to Cedar Creek. Emily immediately felt her stomach tighten. Brad smiled politely. "Good morning, Emily." Emily crossed her arms. "You are not welcome here." Brad ignored her and looked around the diner instead. "Still standing, I see." His eyes landed on Marcus. "Interesting." Marcus did not react. Brad gestured toward the men behind him. "These are financial advisors. We are conducting evaluations for potential redevelopment opportunities in this area." Emily's voice sharpened. "You are not evaluating anything here." Brad tilted his head slightly. "Actually, I believe the bank has already begun that process." Emily froze. Marcus's expression remained calm, but his attention sharpened slightly. One of the advisors placed a tablet on the counter. "Property values in this district are projected to decline another 15% within 6 months due to reduced commercial viability." Emily shook her head. "That is not true." Brad smiled faintly. "Unfortunately, projections do not care about feelings." Marcus finally spoke. "Projections are only as accurate as the data used to generate them." The advisor looked at him. "And you are?" Marcus replied, "Someone who reads reports carefully." Brad laughed softly. "He reads reports." Sophie suddenly stood up from her booth. "My dad is smart." Emily gently placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder. "It is okay." Brad leaned slightly forward. "Emily, I am offering you one last chance. Sell now, avoid financial damage later." Emily looked at the diner around her. The booths her mother used to clean every morning. The counter where she learned how to balance registers. The kitchen where she worked double shifts after school. "This is not just a building," she said quietly. Brad sighed. "Sentimental value does not stop foreclosure." Marcus stepped closer to Emily. "It can if the underlying problem is corrected." Brad turned toward him. "And let me guess, you're going to fix it?" Marcus met his gaze. "Yes." The room went silent for a moment. Brad shook his head. "You are not from here. You do not understand how things work." Marcus replied calmly. "I understand how systems are designed to function when they are not manipulated." One of the advisors looked slightly uncomfortable. Brad noticed and quickly regained control of the conversation. Emily, I am giving you professional advice. Do not let emotions or strangers cloud your judgment. Emily looked at Marcus. Can you actually help me? Marcus nodded once. Yes, but only if you are willing to trust the process. Before Emily could answer, the diner television mounted in the corner suddenly switched to a breaking news banner. Everyone turned toward it instinctively. The reporter on screen spoke clearly. Authorities confirmed that billionaire entrepreneur Marcus Hale remains missing from public appearances following internal restructuring at Hale Ventures Corporation. The entire diner froze. Emily slowly turned toward Marcus. Brad's confident expression disappeared instantly. Sophie looked up at her father. Dad. Marcus closed his eyes briefly as the reality he had been avoiding finally entered the room without warning. Emily whispered, Marcus. And for the first time since he arrived in Cedar Creek, the truth about who he really was no longer had anywhere left to hide. The moment the television announcement finished, the entire atmosphere inside Rosie's diner shifted into something heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the truth that had just been spoken aloud. Emily stood completely still behind the counter, her mind refusing to fully process what she had just heard. Marcus Hale, billionaire, entrepreneur, missing from public appearances. The name echoed in her thoughts like a contradiction she could not reconcile with the man standing only a few feet away from her, the man who had fixed her dishwasher at sunrise and shared coffee with her in silence. Sophie immediately stepped closer to Marcus, gripping his hand tightly. Brad, who had been standing near the counter with confidence only moments before, now looked visibly unsettled, his earlier composure replaced by disbelief. That is not possible, Brad said under his breath. Marcus did not look at the screen again. Instead, he gently placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder. It was only a matter of time, he said quietly. Emily finally found her voice. Marcus, is that true? Marcus turned to her slowly. There was no attempt to deny it, no attempt to escape it. Yes, he said simply. The single word landed heavily in the room. Emily took a step back. You are the Marcus Hale? Marcus nodded once. Sophie looked up at Emily with concern. He did not want people to know, she said softly, as if trying to protect him. Brad let out a short, nervous laugh. This is insane. You have got to be kidding me. Marcus finally looked directly at him. I am not. One of the financial advisors from earlier had already pulled out his phone, clearly recognizing the situation and stepping slightly away from the counter. Whispers began spreading through the small group of customers who had gathered for breakfast, all of them now staring at Marcus with a mixture of shock and confusion. Emily felt her entire understanding of the past 2 days collapse and rebuild itself at the same time. The calm traveler, the repaired dishwasher, the financial knowledge, the expensive watch she had briefly seen. It all suddenly made sense in a way that felt overwhelming. Why would someone like you be here? She asked, her voice quieter now. Marcus took a slow breath before answering. Because sometimes stepping away is the only way to see what matters without distortion. Brad shook his head, still trying to recover. You expect us to believe that the CEO of Hale Ventures was sleeping in a storage room behind a diner? Marcus turned slightly toward him. I was not sleeping there because I had nowhere else to go. The room went silent again. Sophie held on to Marcus's sleeve tighter. Emily's expression shifted from shock to something more conflicted. Then why hide it? She asked. Marcus looked at Sophie for a brief moment before responding. Because my life in that world was built on constant noise, constant pressure, and constant decisions made by people who stopped seeing consequences as personal. He paused slightly. After my wife passed away, I needed distance. Not from business. From everything that made me forget how to exist without it. The room grew even quieter. Even Brad seemed unsure of what to say now. Marcus continued. I was not supposed to stay long. Just long enough to reset. Emily whispered, and Sophie. Marcus's expression softened immediately. She is the only reason I am still here at all. Sophie nodded slightly. He promised we would find somewhere quiet for a little while. Emily looked at the little girl again, then back at Marcus, and the pieces of the story began to shift into something deeper than shock. Brad finally regained enough composure to speak. So what now? You think this changes anything? You are still in a small-town diner that is about to be taken by the bank. Marcus met his gaze steadily. No, he said calmly. It is not. Brad frowned. What does that even mean? Marcus slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document, placing it on the counter beside the bank envelope. Emily hesitated before picking it up. As she unfolded it, her eyes widened slightly. It was a preliminary acquisition restructuring plan, but instead of purchasing the diner, it outlined a full stabilization and community investment model under a private foundation name she had never seen before. Emily looked up. What is this? Marcus answered simply. A way to make sure places like this are not erased because of short-term financial pressure. Brad stared at the document, visibly unsettled now. You're already moving assets in this area? Marcus replied calmly. I do not move assets without understanding what they are connected to. Emily's voice trembled slightly. You were never just passing through, were you? Marcus looked at her for a long moment. No, he said quietly. I was already here the moment I walked in. The silence that followed Marcus Hale's words felt different from anything Emily had ever experienced inside Rosie's diner, because it was no longer the silence of confusion, but the silence of realization settling into every corner of the room. Emily stood behind the counter, still holding the unfolded document, her eyes scanning lines that described investments, community stabilization plans, and long-term redevelopment strategies that were far beyond anything she had ever imagined for a small-town diner. Sophie sat quietly in the booth now, watching her father with a calm trust that seemed unaffected by the tension around them. Brad remained frozen near the counter, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by a quiet uncertainty he was clearly struggling to hide. Marcus spoke again, his voice steady but softer than before. I did not come here to take anything away from you. Emily looked up slowly. Then why does it feel like everything just changed? Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging the weight of her words. Because truth always changes the shape of what people thought they understood. Brad finally broke the silence with a forced laugh. So what now? You're going to save the diner out of charity? Marcus turned toward him calmly. No, not charity. He paused for a moment. Structure, sustainability, and respect for what already exists. Emily lowered the document slightly. This is a foundation name I have never heard of. Marcus replied, It is new. Sophie suddenly spoke up from the booth. Dad said we were building something that helps people stay instead of leaving. Emily felt her throat tighten slightly at the innocence in Sophie's voice. Brad stepped forward again, trying to regain control. Emily, you cannot seriously trust this. He shows up, hides who he is, and now suddenly he is rewriting everything. Marcus looked at Brad directly. I did not rewrite anything. I revealed what was already unstable. Brad opened his mouth, but hesitated for the first time. Emily looked between them, her emotions tangled between disbelief and something unexpectedly grounded. Slowly, she set the document down on the counter. If what you are saying is real, she said quietly, then this diner is not just mine anymore. It becomes part of something much bigger. Marcus shook his head slightly. It is still yours. That is the point. Emily frowned. I do not understand. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly, so only she could hear clearly. Ownership without pressure is not ownership. It is freedom. Those words landed differently than anything Brad had ever said before. Emily looked around the diner again, but this time she saw it differently. Not as something fragile about to disappear, but as something standing at a crossroads. Brad finally exhaled sharply. You are making a mistake, Emily. This is exactly how people lose control of their own businesses. Marcus responded calmly. Control is not the same as stability. Brad looked at him for a long moment, then back at Emily. You are choosing a stranger over someone who has lived here your entire life. Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at Sophie, who gave her a small, trusting smile. Then she looked at Marcus, who said nothing more, as if he understood that the decision was not something he could influence. Emily slowly spoke. I'm not choosing a stranger. She paused. I'm choosing whether I believe what I see in front of me or what I've been told I should fear. The room fell completely silent again. Brad tightened his jaw. Realizing he had lost ground, he could not recover. Marcus nodded once, a subtle acknowledgement without celebration. Sophie whispered softly, "Does that mean we can stay?" Emily looked at her and smiled faintly. "Yes," she said, "you can stay." Outside, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds